So, hello guys. Today we have with us a football writer and a football commentator, Andy West. He specializes in the region of Spain and has written books like Lionel Messi and the Art of Living. And he also commentates and writes for ESPN, if I'm right. Am I right, Andy?
Yeah, I do commentary for La Liga TV, which is the English language broadcasting for La Liga. So anywhere in the world that La Liga is shown in English, that's our commentary. So yeah, I get to follow the whole league closely, which is nice because I'm sure we'll talk about Real Madrid and Barca, but you know it's a 20-team league, and that's what makes it really all the variety. So it's nice to follow the whole thing, and for people there who watch Barca games, watch Real Madrid games, great. But I'd really encourage you to watch other teams as well because there's a lot of variety.
Of course, I mean, even when you support teams like Barca, Real, or Atleti, you get to see the other team's culture in their stadiums. For example, you get to see De La Ceramica for Villarreal and Benito Villamarin for Real Betis. So, of course, those are the important fixtures for us too, because I'm a Barca fan personally. But
Yeah.
my next question was, what exactly is I don't know if you can put it in a box, but what exactly is the Spanish footballing culture centered around?
Spanish football culture. That's an interesting question, and I think there's a short answer, and I'll give you that one first. But there's a much better, longer answer as well. The short answer is about technique. Historically, Spanish football has been about controlling the ball. Every Spanish youngster, when they start to play football, they learn those basic techniques of controlling the ball, being able to manipulate the ball, and that runs through to the club teams and of course the national team. People who remember the World Cup winning team, 12 years ago now, Iniesta, Xavi, Fabregas, players like that, they were all comfortable on the ball, and that is the trademark of Spanish football. And now's the longer answer, and this is what I referred to in my earlier comment about the variety of football in Spain. There are so many other characteristics as well, and Spain is, as a country, it's nowhere near as big as India, obviously, but it is a big country. It's 3 times the size of England, for example, and has 15 million fewer people. So it's very spread out, and historically, the cities where people lived were quite a long way apart, and only recently has it been easy to travel between those different cities and regions, which means that each city, each region developed its own culture, which is quite distinct and quite different from the rest of the country. Lots of different languages, for example, throughout Spain. So if you go to Vigo in the northwest, or La Coruña, where Deportivo La Coruña are based, it's a totally different place from going to Andalusia in the south, where Sevilla, Granada, Malaga, which in parts is like a desert, whereas in the northwest it's very, very green. It feels like England, you know, with the green hills and the countryside, and that reflects in many, many ways in the way people live, the culture, the food, and also in the football. So in the Basque Country, for example, which is the area in the north of Spain bordering onto France, where Bilbao and San Sebastian are the main cities. Real Sociedad, based in San Sebastian, their football has always been tough and hard because it's cold there. People think of Spain as sun and beaches, which it is in places, but other parts in the Basque Country, it can be really cold. Winters are hard, and that means they've developed a different culture, and that reflects in the football. So the teams, Athletic Club, Real Sociedad, and Osasuna, who are nearby in Pamplona, have always been associated with physical, direct, fast football, and that remains the case. You watch Athletic Club and a game, especially when they're at home with the atmosphere at San Mamés, it's very intense and it's very physical, totally unlike what you might traditionally associate with the tiki-taka of Spanish football, which it does exist as well, but not only that.
Sure. Continue. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, you were saying the Pamplona football is physical. The Catalonian is. What about Madrid? Can you tell me more about how, what exactly is footballing in Madrid? Which are the
Yeah, Madrid's a really interesting city. It's obviously it's the capital of Spain, and when you go there, it's got a very Spanish feel, if that's a pretty obvious thing to say, but it's very different from Barcelona, which is more North European, as the two major cities of the country. Barcelona, when you've been to Madrid, you can see why Catalans say we're not Spanish. It feels totally different. Whereas Madrid is everything you would imagine about Spain if you've never been there. But it's also a city which has a huge influence from South America. Obviously, Spain historically colonialized South America, and lots of that. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. They're all independent countries, but that influence lives on. South America is, apart from Brazil, is Spanish speaking, and the ties between Spain and that continent are very, very deep. And I think it's about 20% of the population of Madrid are from South America originally, whether born in South America and moved to Madrid, or their parents did. And so the number of Colombians, Ecuadorians, Chileans, Argentinians, and so there's that South American joy and expressiveness that I think goes through to the different teams in Madrid, especially Real Madrid, which obviously has always had this deep connection with South America, and going back to Di Stefano. And then the current teams as well, and more recently like Di Maria, Casemiro, Vinicius. So there's that proud Spanish feel to it, but also the South American influence. And within Madrid, there's the different social status between Real Madrid, which is Real means royal, so it's the royal team, and Atletico, which is the people's team. As Diego Simeone never forgets to tell us, they're the working class team for the hard workers in the streets. And they have, therefore, this different style, different expectations. Real Madrid expect flamboyance, entertainment. They're the aristocracy of Spanish football. Atletico are willing to fight for anything because that's the way their fans live. And then, you could go on and talk about the other teams of Madrid, like Getafe, Rayo Vallecano, Leganés, who are all in Madrid, but obviously dwarfed by the big two.
Do you feel that the Madrid derby is sort of like the Super Clasico in terms of philosophy?
Yeah, it's a huge game that's become bigger in the last few years because of Atletico's success. Until about 10 years ago, when Diego Simeone arrived, historically it wasn't that big a game outside of the city. Obviously, there was always that local bragging rights, but globally, Atletico weren't challengers for anything, so it didn't really matter if every now and then they caused an upset. And even Real Madrid fans weren't that bothered about the game because they would nearly always win it, and even if they didn't, they would finish above Atletico in the table 9 times out of 10. And so there wasn't that rivalry, kind of like Barca and Espanyol, where it means a lot more to Espanyol fans than to Barca fans. But obviously that's changed with Diego Simeone, and what he's done is incredible with Atletico, turning them from a team that was always mid-table. They'd occasionally win a cup, have a good season here and there, but they were never consistent. And now they're every season contenders for every trophy. And we are disappointed in them when, for example, they lose against Bayer Leverkusen in the Champions League this week. We think, well, that's a poor result. Historically, Atletico would be delighted to be anywhere near the Champions League, never mind being disappointed to lose to a strong German team. So he's transformed Atletico, and with it, he's transformed the Madrid derby into a much bigger occasion.
Totally. Also, I think with the rise of Atletico, I think we've seen Valencia fall, right? What happened to them? What happened to them over time?
Financial problems, basically. They overspent towards the end of the 2000s, the first decade of the century, where they started the century with one of the strongest teams in Europe. People not old enough to remember might need to be reminded, but Valencia reached 2 consecutive Champions League finals where they lost both of them to Real Madrid, one, and the other to Bayern Munich. But they were one of the strongest teams in Europe. Rafa Benitez was the coach, up and coming then. And they tried to cling on to that position as one of the best teams, and they did it by spending a lot of money. They had lots of great players like David Villa, Fernando Morientes, Juan Mata, Joaquin, but they spent too much on players, and they spent too much on trying to build a new stadium, which was started about 15 years ago. Mestalla, which is Valencia's stadium, is one of the oldest in Spain, and I love it. It's a great stadium because it's so old. It's got a lot of atmosphere, but it needs updating. And rather than updating it, they want to build a new stadium. This was the old ownership, but they spent, I don't know, 200 million, something like that, on building the stadium. And then just at that time, there was the global financial crash, started in the US and came into Europe, and then affected the whole world. And Valencia, as a region, was one of the worst hit parts in Spain, and that totally killed the stadium project, and left the club in huge debt. And then I think it was 2014, Peter Lim took over, a Singaporean businessman who he gets a huge amount of criticism from Valencia fans because he's not investing money into the club, not investing the amount of money that they want anyway. But it shouldn't be forgotten that he basically saved the club. They had hundreds of millions of debt, and he took over and made them survive. So, and there was the initial gratitude towards him. Since then, he has made a lot of terrible decisions, none more so than hiring Gary Neville as his manager. In fact, I think they've had 13 managers in 12 years, which shows how bad your recruitment is. If you need to recruit a new manager every year, it's not the managers who are doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong if you can't keep managers for longer than that. So he's not been a very good owner, but he did take over a club that was in huge financial problems. And his policy now is to develop young players and then sell them, like Carlos Soler, we saw go to PSG during the recent transfer window. And that will continue to be their model. I think they'll be, for the foreseeable future, a mid-table team. And you're right to point out that Atletico took their place as the challengers to the big two.
Also, first two questions related to Valencia. One, that Villarreal are on the upswing. So I'd like to know how that happened as a trend, how Villarreal came up. And also, do you think Gennaro Gattuso is a good coach for Valencia?
Sorry, the first question, how the area of Valencia?
Villarreal.
Villarreal, yeah. Well, that's an amazing story. It's a town of 50,000 people. And it's such a small town that when you go on the train, so Barcelona and Valencia are both on the east coast of Spain. They're about 300-400 kilometers apart. And when you go on the train from Barcelona to Valencia, Villarreal is so small, the train doesn't even stop there because there's nothing of interest. There's the ceramics factory, where the stadium is the Ceramica. Exactly. But there's very little else. That part of the coastline is a very popular tourist destination. There are a lot of towns that have a lot of development with hotels and beaches, but Villarreal isn't one of those. It's a nothing kind of place. And then about 20 years ago, the man who's still the president, Roig, took over and started to develop the team. Hired Manuel Pellegrini as a coach, who I think is maybe the most underrated coach in world football when you see what he's done at so many clubs. And he took them into the Champions League. They finished runners-up in La Liga. I think they got to the Champions League semi-final as well. And you thought, well, what an amazing story. But what's even more amazing is that 15 years later, they're still there. They're still there at the top. They had one blip where they got relegated, but then Marcelino took them straight back up. And since they came back up, they've been top half of the table and challenging for Champions League places, obviously last season getting to the semi-final. And they've been doing it on a small budget by spending well on lesser known players. Like Gerard Moreno is a great example.
Too good, yeah.
He was a good striker for Espanyol, but nothing more than that. No one was talking of him as the next Spain striker or a player who'll be worth 100 million. But Villarreal signed him.
Is he a local from Villarreal?
No, he's from I think he's from Barcelona area or Catalonia, and certainly came up with Espanyol. So that's his team. And but Villarreal signed him from there when he was just a kind of quite good, fairly promising young player, and they've helped him develop into this world-class talent. Another great example is Pau Torres, and he came through the academy, which has produced a lot of really good players as well. Jeremy Pino is another one that they've developed. Oh, yeah. Now this season we're seeing Nicholas Jackson as well, who isn't from Villarreal, but they signed him when he was young, developed him for a couple of years, and now he's in the first team. And so just a really well-run club that spend their money wisely, make good decisions in recruitment, and they're punching so far above their weight that it really is it's not credible what they're doing, but they continue to do it year after year. And then Gattuso, you asked about.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is he's at Valencia, where he's not going to get the resources he wants. And it's the same pattern we've seen over the last 10 years, as I mentioned, with all those other managers who've come and gone. They've come in thinking, Valencia's a big club. We've got a lot of fans. We've got a lot of potential. We've got some talented players. But then after a while, they've become frustrated because their best players have been sold. They've had to replace them with young or cheap players. And relationships are broken down between the manager and the boardroom. And they end up leaving after the team finishes in mid-table. It was exactly the same with Bordalas this time last year. And however good Gattuso is as a coach, I don't think he's going to spend 4 or 5 years there and gradually build them up in the way that Villarreal did, because that's just not happening at Valencia. People, unfortunately, after a while, people just don't want to work there as coaches because they don't feel supported by the club. By the owners, so they leave and someone else comes in and the same cycle repeats. So I don't think Valencia will do anything more than mid-table, and I don't think Gattuso will be there next year.
Oh. Also on Twitter, because I've followed you for some time now, I've heard you speak a lot about Real Betis. So could you talk about that? Because I have saw a documentary by Papa 90, and my God, is that club a beautiful one. Even this region of Andalusia, even the Sevilla fixture, which used to trouble all Barca fans, because that was a really scary place to play at some time. So could you highlight more about the Andalusian region?
Yeah. Well, firstly, a lot of people may not know, Real Betis is a team based in the city of Seville. People, obviously, everyone knows Sevilla, but there are 2 teams in the city. Betis is one of them. And actually, Betis is the bigger club. Just look at the average attendances. Betis have an average of around 50,000. Sevilla have an average of around 35,000. So that shows you Betis have more fans than Sevilla, even though you wouldn't necessarily think that as an outsider, I don't think. And they're also the club of the region of Andalusia. Seville is the biggest city in Andalusia in the south of Spain. But really, Sevilla, the team, are only really supported by people from the city, whereas Betis draw fans from all over the region. People will drive into Seville from the surrounding towns to support Betis. And after the Second World War, in the 50s and 60s in particular, a huge number of people left Andalusia because it's traditionally an agricultural area and there was no work. So they traveled to other cities, a lot of them to places like Barcelona and Bilbao, to find work. But so many of them are Betis fans and have kept their love for Betis. So wherever you go, and this applies to Betis more than any other team in Spain, wherever you go to a game, if Betis are the away team, they have a huge number of fans. And a lot of those, they haven't traveled from Seville to follow the team. They live locally, wherever it might be. And so that's the club. And I think actually they're the biggest club in the world that hasn't won a major trophy for 50 years or so. They've won a couple of Copa del Reys. Obviously, they're the reigning holders of it, but they haven't won a league title or a major European trophy. And I don't think there's, maybe Newcastle is another one, a club that has a huge fan base that has never won anything. Betis are with Newcastle in that. And of the current team, we can go back to Pellegrini, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, who I think is a fantastic coach. And he took over Betis at a time they were struggling, especially defensively. And this is the thing that Pellegrini always does. He's given the team balance. They have a great structure throughout the team, from defense to attack. They play through midfield. They've got some great individuals, and especially Sergio Canales and Nabil Fekir. To watch the two of those together, they're both such great technical players, and they have a brilliant understanding as well, the two of them playing together. And they're both left-footed, and I'm biased because I'm left-footed, so I always like a left-footed player. And so to see those two together with the style that they play, but it's also within the framework of a really solid team. And they've got a great chance this year of finishing in the top four for the Champions League and finishing above Sevilla, which they haven't done for a while, their local rivals. So definitely a team to watch this season.
Yeah, so now let's come to my favorite region of Spain, Barcelona, Catalonia. So Barcelona, the thing is, in India, I think Messi and Ronaldo were the major crowd attractors, because that's where our people saw the highlights. We came for Messi, we stuck around for Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, and then all of philosophy, Pedri, Gavi, all of those things. So can you highlight what Catalonian football is like, and also why it became so political?
Well, I'll answer the first part first. A lot of people in Catalonia want to be independent from Spain. Historically, Catalonia was independent from Spain. It was a separate state. This is before Spain even existed as a country, when it was all based around various kings and their marriages and their wars. And Catalonia was an important European state. And it held territories, islands like Mallorca, Sardinia, Sicily, even towards Italy, were Catalan. And a lot of trading went through Barcelona's port. Christopher Columbus, when he set out to discover the Americas, left from, he didn't leave from Barcelona. He returned to Barcelona. So it was a huge, if you go to Barcelona, at the bottom of the Ramblas, the main street heading down to the sea, there's a statue of Christopher Columbus to remember him returning from discovering the Americas. So Catalonia historically was an important independent entity. And then about 300 years ago, after various wars, it ended up being assimilated into Spain. Now, a lot of people locally, there's a separate language. Catalan is totally different language from Spanish. It's different to Spanish in the way that French is different to Spanish. They've got the same family, but they're different languages. And so a lot of people in Catalonia want independence. And there was the Spanish Civil War about 90 years ago, and that was won by General Franco, who was very much a unifier of Spain. And during the about 40 years that he was a dictator of Spain, he banned Catalan language. You couldn't teach it in schools. You couldn't publish it in books. You couldn't use it in public in any way. So the safe place where Catalans felt they could go and express their Catalan identity and sing their songs in Catalan was Camp Nou, where they could be there, could be Barca fans. So Barca, this is where Més que un club comes from, more than a club. The club logo, the motto, comes from this identity with Catalan nationalism. And that survives now very much. So that's why it's political, because for centuries, a lot of Catalans want to be independent from Spain. And Barca is their team and is their way of expressing that. But I must add, to make it a balanced perspective, by no means everybody in Catalonia wants that. A lot of people want to be part of Spain, and Español means literally Spanish. So the other team in Barcelona has this affinity to Spain, doesn't want independence. And it's been, forget the football, it's been a local debate and a big one. There've been protests, riots on a small scale. Fortunately, there's never been real outright violence, but there's been a lot of discontent on both sides, from the Catalans who want independence and from the Spaniards who think they shouldn't be pushing for it. And Barca is in the middle of this. So that is the backdrop to why Barca is such a political club.
Also, at least nowadays, because of Barca have been activating so many levers, I feel that it's frowned upon by Tebas. So what exactly is the situation with Tebas, and why are so many people, cursing him? Can you answer that, if that's not too controversial for you to answer?
Yeah, Tebas Javier Tebas is the president of La Liga, and he has been for a long time now. And I do think he's in a difficult position because he wants to grow where his job is. It's not just he wants to. His job as president of La Liga is to develop the whole league. But he recognizes that by far the biggest attraction globally for La Liga is Real Madrid and Barcelona. So he has to constantly fight a kind of compromise that he has to do enough to keep Barca and Real Madrid fairly happy, or at least happy-ish, without them outright leaving the league, which they tried to do with the Super League, although they would have wanted to stay in La Liga and play in both, but that's another question. But at the same time, there's 20 teams in La Liga. Barca and Real Madrid are only 2 of them. He's got 18 other teams to think about and to try to develop. And he's done that by changing the structure of the way the television revenue is distributed. It used to be every club negotiated their own deal. So Barca and Real Madrid ended up with by far, far, far more than anyone else. Mm-hmm. Now they still do get far more than anyone else, but nowhere near as big. The gap used to be like that, and now it's like that. So it's getting closer, and that is something he's done to try to grow the whole league. That has obviously frustrated Barca and Real Madrid as well, because they don't want to be pulled down to the level of Alaves and Osasuna. They want to be super clubs. And one of the things he's done to try to develop the league is the financial fair play, where a lot of European football talks about it. Spanish football actually does it, that you are not allowed to spend more than a certain amount, which is determined by your budget. So you can't get yourself into a financial black hole and have to go into administration or go out of business like a lot of clubs have in other countries. Especially England, there's been so many clubs who were in the Premier League, overspent, got relegated, and almost went out of business. Bolton, one example, Derby County, another. That doesn't happen in Spain because the clubs aren't allowed to get themselves into such a bad position in the first place. And so this summer, Barca, with the president, Laporta, had to come up with a way of raising money so that he could spend money to buy players. And that was where the levers came from, the idea of selling parts of the club's commercial assets. So selling to an investment firm 25% of the club's TV revenue, 25% of their merchandising, and so on. Spotify, and that raised, exactly, and give the sponsorship to Spotify as well. That's all part of it. So by doing that, he raised a lot of money, which meant that the club had more revenue. So La Liga said, okay, now you can spend. It's a gamble because if this squad doesn't work out, if Koundé doesn't turn out to be the player that we think he will be, if Lewandowski starts to age and not be the player he used to be, if Dembélé has more injury problems, this time next year, they will not have that money to spend that they have done this summer. If these players don't succeed, they can't do what they did with Coutinho and Griezmann and Arthur and all the others and say, oh, well, we'll get rid of them. We'll buy another lot. They won't have that money to do that again. So it's a big gamble. and they need this squad and they need this manager to be successful. And Xavi is a gamble as well because he's a legend, of course. He's one of the best midfielders in history, but he's inexperienced as a coach, and his team and he are finding their way in terms of being able to compete with the top European teams. And I thought we saw that last night. There were moments against Bayern when they were really good. They should have scored. They had chances. And most days they would take those chances. But then that 10 minutes, start of the second half, they were weak. They were mentally weak collectively. They didn't have that strength of character to say, okay, we're under pressure now. We're not playing well at the moment. We just got to hang on in there. We got to ride this out. They couldn't do that. They conceded 2 goals and the game went. That's what they've got to develop. And they've got to develop it quickly because this team has been built to win now, not in 5 years. So really interesting season for Barca.
But I mean, just looking at the team compared to before, it just feels so good that this team feels a lot more rejuvenated and, a lot more energetic. So how do you think Barca, Real and Atleti will fare in Europe this season?
In Europe, Real Madrid, you can never write them off. If they don't reach at least the semi-finals, it would be a big surprise. And if they win it again, yeah, you would expect that as well. Because they have what I talked about with Barca a minute ago. Barca lack that bit of mental strength during the tough phase of the game against Bayern. Real Madrid have that. They have a problem in a game, they'll find a way. They play for moments. They don't necessarily have to be the best team. They will just find their moments and take them. And so then, yeah, they're among the favourites for sure. Barca, we'll see how they develop this season. I don't want to sit on the fence and not give you a proper answer, but I don't know. It depends how they develop. If they can develop this mental toughness that PSG have not yet been able to develop. They've had this succession of great players, and they win the league easily every year because they don't have strong competition. But because they don't have that strong competition, they're not battle hardened. They're not ready to suffer. They're not ready to have difficult times in games. When they do, they're like, we're not used to this, and they fold. And that's what Barca have got to develop. So we'll see in the next few months whether they can. I think they'll get through the group. I think they'll get good results against Inter Milan to get through the group, and then we'll see what happens in the knockout. Atletico, I'm really worried about them this season. They look like a team that have lost their way. I think Diego Simeone is still trying to find a new path for the team. He wants to transition the team from being defensive and counter-attacking and physical that they were when they won the league first time with him, into a more attacking team that wants to have the ball and can accommodate flair players like Joao Felix and Thomas Lemar, but he doesn't really know how to. That's not in his instincts.
Why so? Why does he want to become offensive? I mean, obviously, probably he must be aiming for the UCL and attacking might be, but I think, is it sticking to his style work? Didn't it work for him better?
Why he's doing it is kind of because he has to, because of the success that he's created. He's turned the club, as was said earlier, from an underachieving mid-table team into one of the strongest teams in Europe. And when you're one of the strongest teams in Europe, you can and you move into one of the best new stadiums in Europe, and you start spending 80 million on Lemar, 120 million on Joao Felix. You can't get away anymore with being the poor little underdog that the whole world's against you. You've got one of the most expensive transfers in history. You're not a little underdog anymore. So he is paying the price for his own success, that he transformed the team, and he now has to deal with the consequences of that. And it's not in his instincts to know how to do that. So it's something that he has to do, because when you've got the kind of players they have now, he can't look them in the eye and say, we're the underdogs. We've got to fight for everything we get. We're going to defend everybody behind the ball. Joao Felix will look at him and go, I'm one of the most talented players in the world. Why are you asking me to do that? Why did you bring me here? So he's trying to find this new way, but I still think he doesn't know how. So I'm not even convinced that they'll be top 4 in La Liga. Never mind the Champions League. If they don't make it through the group stage, I won't be surprised.
That seems like a terrible fate for Atleti this year. But moving on to the next segment, which I call underrated. Can you name three underrated things? One, an underrated budding talent, not from Barcelona or Madrid, just someone who's not so mainstream. Underrated talent, one underrated stadium and atmosphere, and one underrated footballing city from Spain. Because I like to know about the cultures from about the countries, but not the typical famous.
Yeah, good question. An underrated player, Aimar Oroz, Oroz. He plays for Osasuna, and he just came into the first team this season. He's 20 years old. He's a homegrown player for Osasuna, and he was with their reserve team last season. He's been promoted into the first team. He scored twice already. One of them was a penalty to beat Sevilla on the opening day. And he scored a great goal against Rayo Vallecano. And he looks like a seriously good player. He's only 20. He's only played 4 or 5 first team games, but he's a player to watch out for. Underrated city.
A city and a stadium atmosphere.
Yeah, the city. I don't know if it's underrated, but Seville is my favorite city in Spain. It's got so much history. It's a beautiful city, and it's got this rivalry as well between Sevilla and Betis, the two teams who epitomized the city really. And the stadium, San Mamés Athletic Club. Go to Bilbao, and it dominates the city. It's right in the heart of the city centre, just up from the river. There's a famous Guggenheim Museum, and the atmosphere is so passionate. So athletic. Yeah, San Mamés is just a special atmosphere. Sort of like I was saying earlier with Barca and the way they represent Catalonia in many people's eyes, but not everybody's. Bilbao in Athletic Club really is like the Basque national team in some respects. Real Sociedad fans won't like to hear that, but it feels more than just a club game, especially when they've got a big game. There's nothing like the atmosphere there, because the stadium is right in the city centre. All the fans gather in the city centre for hours before the game. They'll go to the tapas bars, the pinchos bars, where pinchos is a Basque type of food, which is great if you ever get the chance to go. And then they make their way to the stadium, and it's a day. It's not just a game; it's a whole event. So that's the stadium to try to get to.
Oh, and now this will be my last question to you: is what do you think about the Spanish national team and their chances in the World Cup, which is in November? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. They've over the last couple of years they've looked good at times and struggled at other times. The goal scoring is an issue, and it's interesting for me how Spain has produced so many great players over the last 20 years, but very few strikers. Since David Villa, there hasn't been a world-class striker. Alvaro Morata is the player that Luis Enrique likes the most, but he has his moments, but you don't look at him as a player who's going to win a World Cup for you.
He isn't that reliable.
He's not. But Luis Enrique loves him, so he's going to be the starter. I think they've got a chance. They're in the maybe second tier of countries below, I'd say. I think Brazil and Argentina are the favourites for me. I don't know how you see it, but those two look the best for me. And then Spain, one of the group of countries behind them.
Okay. I guess that's it for today, and all we can do is wait to see what happens in the World Cup. So I'll be rooting for Argentina because that's where my love comes from. But thank you for informing me so much about Spain and about all of its culture, because I didn't know where to get all this deep knowledge, and I thought who better to ask than a person living in Spain and who himself has learned the culture practically. So first of all, thank you for all of this, and really.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and I hope that one day you get the chance to visit all these places.
Oh, for sure. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you.